Hello, and welcome to another Debating Europe Citizens panel moderated by me, Joe Lutovarsky. I'm the editor-in-chief of Debating Europe. Debating Europe, of course, is a project of the think tank Friends of Europe, and this is the second in a series of online panel discussions with European citizens and civil society representatives that we're holding ahead of Friends of Europe's annual State of Europe high-level roundtable event in Brussels in October. The idea is to discuss the same topics being debated at State of Europe, and then we'll try to formulate some questions or interventions that we can display at State of Europe for participants to respond to. The topic of the panel today is on European sovereignty, it's on globalization, it's on supply chains, and it's linked to a session at State of Europe. But before we get into the discussion, let's first get our panel to introduce themselves. I'm joined here today by Mariana, Ivo, and Ricardo. Mariana, welcome. If you could just introduce yourself.
My name is Mariana Veiga. I am half Brazilian and half Italian, but I currently live in Slovenia.
Welcome, Mariana. And Ivo, welcome to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ivo, and I am originally Bulgarian, but I am dialing in from Canada, Montreal.
Welcome, Ivo. And last but not least, we've got Ricardo. Welcome, Ricardo.
So hi, name's Ricardo Silva. I'm originally from Portugal and spend most of my time in Berlin, Germany.
Nice. Okay, perfect. Well, let me start by reading the description of the State of Europe session that we're discussing today, and it might get a kind of some ideas flowing already. So the description is, during the COVID-19 crisis, the impact of rampant globalization was called into question and opened up new conversations about retreating towards reinforced homegrown supply chains. Suddenly, the world woke up to the effects of inherent interdependency of commodities, technology, and vaccine production, strategic autonomy and sovereignty of supply chains, and rethinking globalization became policy buzzwords and urgent to-dos. But reality shows us that it is far from the policy ambitions of any government to truly dismantle globalization. Perhaps what is required is to manage the free market that underpins globalization and tilt global supply chains towards a value-based, liberal, and democratic model. So there's a lot to unpack in that. Lots of kind of buzzwords, lots of things like strategic autonomy, terms that are used a lot in Brussels, but no one's entirely sure exactly what they mean. And when you kind of dig into the details, often different people mean different things. But broadly speaking, look, we all know there are shortages. We know that global supply chains are kind of backed up at the moment for all sorts of reasons, not least the pandemic, but also the war in Ukraine. And so it's maybe causing people to have a think about globalization and global interdependencies, particularly in really critical things such as during the pandemic, PPE and medicines, or energy, or digital infrastructure, these sort of kind of critical questions. So I guess I want to open it up to all of you, just to give us your initial reaction. Maybe you disagree with the way that the debate is even being set up. Do you think we need to rethink globalization and global supply chains? Do you have any kind of thoughts on this? I don't know who wants to kick off the discussion. Maybe I'll start with Mariana, and then we'll kind of go around. Sorry to pick on you, Mariana, but when I sort of read that out, what was the first thing that came into your mind? What are your thoughts on this discussion?
I don't think we can run away from globalization. And we're having two big events in a row that show that. One, terribly tragic, which is the war caused by a group of people and affecting mainly a group of people, and then also by second hand, another big group of people, and before that, a pandemics. So in two very different scenarios, we noticed that we need other countries for supply, either for commodities, either for technologies, but we cannot expect ourselves, one single country, to come up with all the solutions, come up with all the supplies. So even though some people criticize globalization in a sense that it amplifies unequal situations, such as in a sense that you start using more countries that exploit labor, that don't comply with environmental laws, and then you give more power to these countries in detriment of other countries that don't produce that much now because labor is more expensive, is more fair trade related, and all sorts like that. I understand these people that criticize globalization, and we need to find a solution for that. But simply just saying, no, globalization is wrong, let's not do this, we cannot survive on our own.
Okay, no, this is clear. So if I understand correctly, you're sort of saying, look, actually, the shortages and the kind of the price inflation we're all seeing shows how we can't go off on our own. We need other countries. We need a kind of global trade, but it could be done in a fairer way. You could have global trade, which doesn't, as you say, kind of undermine, labor standards or kind of environmental standards. Is that kind of, that's a fair summation?
Yes, but yeah. I don't have any answer for that. Like, I don't know how to make this.
Well, that's a good question, because if the purpose of this discussion is to find questions, okay, what would a more positive globalization look like? How can you kind of not throw the baby out with the bathwater? We'll come back to this. I think that's a really good, that's a potential question. Ivo, let's turn to you. What are your thoughts? Like, is there anything, would you agree with Mariana? Would you disagree, or is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Well, I would actually go in a different direction regarding globalization, because I am a very big fan of really looking at things historically, how they have come up to this point. And I think the phenomenon of globalization really began with, basically the British Empire and the Industrial Revolution. The Brits just wanted to export mass-produced goods everywhere in order to get those money inflows. And nowadays we have those interrelated supply chains between, let's say, political entities of very diverging interests, very divergent ideologies, and so on and so forth. One point I would agree with what Mariana touched upon: you can't really stop globalization. People will find ways to trade with each other just because it makes financial sense. I think I'm not a big fan of the whole I should elaborate what I mean by that, but I don't really think this concepts such as fair trade and respect for human rights and so on, I think that's just a whole bunch of buzzwords without any meaning behind them, because what history has shown us is that people trade on the basis of financial benefit or other benefit. Sometimes it's not financial. Obviously, there are people that sell under market prices in order to gain market share and so on. I don't want to get into details, but what I wanted to say is the following: globalization cannot be stopped, but diversifying your supply chains, diversifying where you get your stuff in general, is going to be key in the future. As Mariana already mentioned, the war that we're experiencing right now has been very, very impactful for Europe and also for some other regions such as the Middle East, because the supply chains were not diversified. Everyone was trading globally, but there are those big players that just dominate the markets. And when they decide they do not want to stick by the rules, you can't really do much to combat that. So just to keep it brief to this question, I think Europe in general, it really, really, really needs to diversify its supply chains and start trading with the right people, even if it's not for the right price. We have to find some other incentive, because obviously importing from countries that are farther, or importing from countries that we really don't have infrastructure built with, can be more expensive. But we need to make sure that some sort of incentives are in place where this globalization really goes by the rules. And by the rules, I mean international law, however vague it might be.
This is really, I think this is interesting. It gets to kind of the heart of the matter, I think, because you said that and I'm not sure if this is true, but I wonder if there's a contradiction in what you said at the beginning and then what you said at the end. And I don't know if it is. I'll try to tease it out. But you began by talking about, I wrote it down, kind of political entities of divergent ideologies. So you introduced this idea of ideologies. And this is something that people are talking about. Is the world dividing into liberal democracies versus authoritarian states, right? Are we seeing this kind of cleavage between these two blocks, like almost a new kind of ideological Cold War, if you want to call it that. But then you talk about interests. You know, you're skeptical that there are values. Values is just a buzzword. It's really about kind of interests. And I wonder, you know, we'll come back to this, and I'll give you a chance to come back. I'm going to want to bring in Ricardo, but I wonder if this is getting to the heart of it. Like, are we, to bring it back to what Mariana said, would a globalization that is based upon fair trade be based around this kind of more democratic ideology? So democratic countries trading with each other, you know, a values-based globalization. And if you wanted to have an autocratic globalization, you can do that. But it would be like the US and Europe trading with each other and strengthening kind of trade ties with other democracies. I don't know if you think, because I think the place of the US is also really important in this when we talk about strategic autonomy. And we'll get into all of this, but this is setting up the discussion nicely. I want to bring in Ricardo before we do, and then we'll everyone can come back. Ricardo, what are your thoughts? Is there anything you want to add? Are you we're going all over the place? Are you a bit lost, or what's coming to your mind?
Well, it's definitely a little bit hard to come in at this point, but yeah. Well, I think the first thing to say about what I've heard so far is that when you put when you introduce the introduction to us, I really liked how it was put, and I really like that the emphasis was on rampant globalization, which to me is a very big difference from globalization and rampant globalization. That when we talk about stopping globalization and so on, like, yeah, maybe it doesn't make sense to stop all trade, but globalization was never about all trade. Globalization is a phenomenon that has happened not so long ago. I think maybe we can, depends on the scholars, of course, but at most like a few hundred years old, which is not that much. While trade has existed for much longer. And so I would like to focus on the point of rampant globalization, because one thing is again, rare metals, rare materials, you know, dry spices going from across India to the world, to Europe and so on, which is problematic as well. But the other part of globalization is if there is a war and the port is blocked, then there are countries that risk starvation. The EU buys as much food as it sells, imports as much food as it sells. It's from a self-sufficiency perspective, and from considering that supply chains are fragile, it's laughable. And then we have the other dimension, which is the only dimension that I've seen missing in the introduction, which is we are in a climate crisis. Globalization, as much as critics like to say that transport is not a big deal, is not a big part of emissions, that is demonstrably false. Last time I calculated, something like 10% of global emissions relate to transport, and then it's not accounted the cost of materials that are required to actually keep up the global supply chains that we have. So yeah, it's. For someone who, with my background as a climate activist, it is very, it brings a little bit of optimism to see that we are considering that maybe there is too much rampant globalization, that maybe we need to rethink things a little bit. But my background is definitely a little bit more catastrophic than how people put it, because it's not just the war in Ukraine, it's not just COVID. There will be more and more challenges to the supply chains that we have that will make things, let's say, that will make things impossible to maintain.
I want to bring in Mariana here because, so we began this kind of round, Mariana, with you sort of saying, look, we need globalization. We can't be completely self-sufficient. We're dependent upon it. And what Ricardo is saying is that if you look at the environmental sustainability of having these kind of shipping things all over the world, if you just look at how vulnerable it's made us to shocks, maybe we can't afford it. Are you convinced by that, or you're still, maybe there's kind of other reasons why you're thinking actually no, globalization is really important, or maybe you're convinced by this idea that there's a distinction between rampant globalization and a kind of, as you said, a kind of fairer globalization. What are your thoughts?
The thing is that there are some countries that simply don't have the thing that they need, either the technology, but mostly the commodity. So I cannot force myself to produce batteries if I don't have the metals necessary to do the batteries. So it's inevitable. It's at some point you will need that. Can you imagine Austria without fish? Okay, Austria is inside European Union, but if you think literally about countries without saltwater fish, so it's basic things, either for survival or for industrial development, that you cannot run from it. I think that what Ivo said is very precise when it comes to not being dependent to monopolies or situations close to monopolies, and not being dependent to only one country. It's another form of not putting the eggs in the same basket. But maybe this could be the answer. Maybe this could be the better option. But what we have right now is that some countries simply cannot be self-sufficient in key elements, and they need to import. And constructing partnerships, commercial partnerships with countries is great. Maybe that's maybe the best exit. But at some point, even those partnerships, they might change. The relationship with the country might change. Even because a government comes in and comes out, and with this polarity, if a government gets replaced, and then someone who was a partner becomes an enemy. And so we need to be very careful how we deal with this, but we need this.
I think this is fascinating. There's 2 points that I think really are excellent points. First of all, Europe is resource poor. Okay, so if we're talking about, we import, like Ricardo was talking about rare metals and so on. If we want to develop, renewable energy, if we want to develop kind of all of the technologies that we may need to become more sustainable environmentally, we're going to need resources from outside of Europe. We'll need to import them. So this is the first one. And the second one, I think you were touching on, Mariana. Tell me if I've got this wrong. There is also, talking about kind of shocks and dependencies, there's this whole kind of multilateral dream, right? This is the 1990s dream, which is that interdependencies cause peace, or that they lead to a more stable system. If I said at the beginning, there's this idea of the world dividing into blocks of authoritarian versus democratic, countries. Is that stable? Is that more stable than countries having these kind of trade relationships? I don't know. That's maybe, I don't know what you think about this. Ricardo, I saw your hand up. I want to get back to you because this is obviously responding to what you had said, but let's bring in Ivo first, and then we'll come around to Ricardo. So Ivo, any thoughts on where the discussion's going?
Yes, I think, well, I love how every one of us is really pulling in a different direction here, or at least that's what I'm getting from this discussion. But I think it's really important, as you mentioned, Joe, Europe is resource poor. And I would like to give an example. This whole topic of trading resources because you're not self-sufficient or because you need something that you do not really have, it's a very, very big point. I mean, civilization has ended because of this. If you think about, I don't want to sound like too much of a history geek here, but if you take a look at like the Bronze Age collapse, you had this whole civilized societies which were dependent on bronze. And what is bronze? It's an alloy between copper and tin. So copper you have everywhere. Tin you really don't. So you have to import it. You have to get it from places that are far away. And if you don't have tin, you don't have bronze, and then you collapse. Your society doesn't work. You don't have the tools that are needed. You fall behind militarily, and other people can come in and really do whatever they want. And if you try to, bring in the modern situation in this, what is the tin of the 21st century? It's energy. It's really energy. Europe does not have the energy it needs. So things such as fossil fuels, oil, like in general, oil, coal, or even natural gas, which is now the very big topic on Europe. I'm still focusing on Europe, I know, but I have the feeling that it's really important that I can survive without importing black caviar. That's no problem. I can survive, and I think civilization would survive. What civilization can survive with, just to mention what Mariana said, are rare earths and really energy, because that's what keeps the industry going. If you don't have energy, if you don't have the input necessary to produce valuable, not valuable, but really the essential stuff to keep civilization going, it's just going to collapse. Maybe not as dramatically as the example that I gave, but it's really going to be a very bad position to be in. So in my opinion, globalization is here to stay, even with sanctions, even with people stopping trade between each other. It will continue just because civilization really depends on it, or at least that's how I see it.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Ivo. Everyone, all of you are pulling in different directions, which is wonderful. I like that. That's where we find interesting, I think, discussions. I do think that, you know, there's a tension in what you're saying and what Ricardo is saying, because you're saying, look, Europe needs to import energies. This is what we have to do. But Ricardo brought on to the discussion, I think very correctly, this issue of climate change. If we keep importing energies, we're going to have the kind of collapse that you're talking about, or we risk it. So, you know, we have sources of energy that are renewable, that won't kind of produce fossil fuels, such as sunlight, such as hydro, and all these, you know, other things that that require technologies such as rare earths or resources, such as rare earths in order to produce these technologies. So I guess I'll hand over to you, Ricardo. I know you've been waiting very patiently. I guess the point is, don't we need to have this period of investment, of kind of, you know, really importing all of these kind of resources that we need, or you trying to move to a circular economy where we're kind of reusing and recycling and so on, in order to break free from the dependencies that Ivo's talking about, these kind of energy importing dependencies? Would you agree with that, or is there anything else that you want to add based upon what we've been saying?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know. The choice of wording for a period of investment maybe would not be my word. I would probably go into more of a transitional transformation. But to connect with what's being said before, and I really like the way that Ivo was putting it, because it's exactly my point. So like Mariana, when you say globalization cannot be stopped because we need it, correct? We need it to keep up what we're doing. And Ivo, you're correct. We need to import energy to keep up what we're doing, because it's the only way that our current mode of civilization can sustain itself. And the irony of this is that given the climate predicament that we're in, if we keep importing, if we keep globalization, it will collapse due to climate disaster. And it is, and how to put it, it's a little bit like the imagination issue that we have with getting rid of a fossil fuel economy. We need it, but we can't have it. It will have to collapse anyway, because either it's going to collapse because of climate effects, or it's going to collapse because, exactly as you said, we need more materials, we need more this, we need to transform, we need to do this. Problem is, there are not enough materials for such a transformation. If we transform the society where we are right now into a, let's say, into a pseudo renewable techno-optimistic dream, there are not enough materials. Because we would need to keep up the globalization. We would need to keep up many things, and so that's what at least in my work that I find myself very often is, it's a crisis of imagination. We need it, but we can't have it. But we struggle to imagine what else could there be, and that's essentially the main point. It's a little bit of a rough one.
It's a trap. I mean, it's an awful trap. I need some optimism. Mariana, you spoke about kind of fair globalization, and you know, how, you know, please bring us some hope. What's an optimistic way out of this trap? Can you think of what a kind of fairer globalization might look like? Because you know, from what you're saying, I get the sense that you know, there is, if we're talking, that we have this metaphor, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There is a kind of baby, right? There's something that we want to keep hold of when it comes to globalization. It's more than just the kind of the self-interested trade. There are, maybe I'm idealistic, I don't know, there's a kind of common humanity, there are these values. I'm not so convinced that it's a buzzword. I do think that there are genuine values. So how do we keep, what's good, do you think, from globalization without falling into this trap? Is it about consuming less? Is it about, this is too much to ask you, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that the solution is even, it involves a theme that is even deeper and even more controversial than globalization, which is capitalism. And as I said, I might need metals and chemicals to make a battery. Some batteries are necessary, but do I need to change my phone after 30 years? So, but could they have made a phone that would last more than 3 years? So yes, I think that part of this crisis is related to overconsumption. But I really don't know how to fix this, because, and these were themes of past focus groups that we had, that, okay, some people are willing more than the others to sacrifice. Oh, there's a fly here, I'm sorry. Some people are willing more than others to sacrifice their consuming habits in exchange to thinking that they are doing the right thing. So there are different types of transactions. There are the necessary transactions related to survival, and other transactions related to luxuries. And I want to have some luxuries. Do I need all of them? Of course not. Can I afford all of them? Of course not. So not affording is already cuts many of these luxuries, and so I think that yes, it's the way to break this over dependency could have been related to over dependence to material goods, but as we saw in other sessions, different people are willing to do different commitments to that.
Yeah, no, this comes up again and again in focus groups, exactly as you've put it. I guess it comes back to what Ivo was saying about black caviar, about like luxuries versus what we really need. I don't know. Ivo, give me some optimism. Like, let's try to make this more kind of solutions focused. We don't have to. You can also lay some pessimism on us as well. Interesting, Ricardo. I'll bring you in, Ricardo, as well. And I saw you were kind of showing your phone, which I hope you've got some kind of optimism based upon technology there. But Ivo, first of all, what are your thoughts? How do we escape? Is this a trap? Do you agree that we're kind of locked in this trap, first of all, and then how do we escape it?
Yes, it is a trap. It is a trap, but there is a way to exit this trap, and I think this has been. Oh, okay, unorthodox opinion coming in. I just have to warn you. I really want to get back. I'm sorry, I sound like a broken record here, but I really want to get back to the points or to the topic of just energy. I see if we had infinite energy in an ideal world, we could make everything sustainable. We could do that. We really could be producing as much as we need, recycling as much as we need, and basically trying to push our society in a direction where we're not basically headed for a self-destruction. I have to disagree or not disagree. I haven't heard what Ricardo thinks about this topic, but I think we're well beyond the point of fixing climate change. I think we just have to adapt to it. I don't think we can fix climate change. I don't think we can reverse what has been happening in those years. I don't think we're going to keep below, what was it, significantly less than 1.5 degrees Celsius, which was the wording used in the Paris Agreement. I don't think that's possible. What we can do is just adapt and find ways to not make it worse. And how do we do this? Well, nuclear energy or nuclear fission in the future. I really see no way out of this. When you take a look at Europe, which is well, relatively one of the rich, I would say, with North America, the two richest continents currently, or the two continents that can afford the most rapid green transition. I would like to put quotes there. I've been living in Germany for a lot of years now. And I have to say, just the sheer amount of bureaucracy that you need for those renewable energy sources. I mean, I don't want to get too much into detail, but in Bavaria, they have these insane rules about wind turbines, not making the landscape ugly, or not having any houses in a 2-kilometer diameter. It's just insane. It's just insane. Like, really, there is no way. I don't think we can really unify the legislation. The legislation just can't catch up with all of the different ideologies and all of the different ways that countries want to develop themselves. So in my opinion, Germany is committing economic suicide right now. Honestly, like I would like to declare that, especially if they really do close their last nuclear power plants. I think this is the way forward, and I think really we have to invest more money in dealing with the toxic waste, because waste from nuclear power plants is something that we really need more research into, and so on. In order to get back to your question and respond with one sentence to you, Joe, we are in a trap. We have a way out of this trap. We don't have the political will to get out of this trap, and I really hope we find it. Because otherwise, this climate catastrophe that is going to come is going to be inevitable, and we're kind of going to be, well, stranded here in Europe, because other continents have way more energy than we do. So yes, that's how I wanted to finish.
Okay, Ricardo, I'll bring you in to react. Do you have some more optimism for us? Do you agree it all comes back to energy? What are your thoughts on what you've heard?
Oof. I don't know if it all comes back to energy, but it's definitely a big part of it. And yeah, just to say it vocally, I completely agree with you, Ivo. Like, how to put it? Yeah, and I mean, I'm a climate activist. I devote most of my time to these issues. But yeah, the more you know. Like, my feeling, so to say, my informed feeling is 2 degrees is, that it's a beautiful dream. Let's put it that way. I don't have a strong opinion on nuclear. My most tolerant self is like neither pro nor against. Like, I remind you that I mean, we're in the interesting situation now that the nuclear reactors in France are having some issues because the rivers don't have enough water, and rivers don't have enough water because of several things. Some of them climate, others industrial agriculture, which is maybe something that should go along with capitalism, which is based on globalization and export economies. But let's not get into that. So basically, okay, first the philosophy, and still without optimism, Joe. I'm sorry. The philosophy would be,
No, I need optimism.
It will come. Philosophy is the more that we keep ourselves in the trap of fossil fuels and globalization, essentially the worse it's going to be for the majority of people. That's the philosophy. So then, what can we do that is the opposite? And essentially, you've got the degrowthers, you've got sufficient economy theorists, and so on. Like, the main thing for me, philosophically, from a macro perspective, as I think Ivo is a fan of, the biggest priority is reducing the energy that we need, not the energy that we consume, but the energy that we need. If we get that, things already help a lot. And then where I draw my optimism from is really that. Well, not from the German government in some cities, basically prohibiting warm showers. It's an interesting development, and it shows that things can change. And I'm really hoping for some ugly towers here to be turned off at night. But anyway, but my optimism comes more from local initiatives, essentially. Like, there are lots of movements. I mean, I see it in Germany. I see it in Portugal, which is a completely different reality. There are lots of small initiatives that are trying to be the transformation that is needed. Be the transformation of like, okay, we need less, we will try to adapt in a way to create local economies, to live in a way, to adapt our structures in a way that is not exploitative. And, like, so this can be, like, from community supported agriculture to people investing in circular materials. I mean, like here right now, I'm working with an initiative that is trying to occupy the hangars of the old airport in Berlin to do a pilot of what this transformation could be, like that we grow things instead of concrete, but from mushrooms, that maybe can people, instead of depending on the government to give them money to insulate their houses, but to do it themselves. Like, so basically everything that is about self-organization, community-led, and etc. Like that's where my optimism comes from. I wanted to give more colorful examples, but I feel like I'm drawing a blank. So sorry, Joe.
No, well, no, this is okay. So it is optimism. It's more kind of locally led. I think I'm very supportive of that. I think these are really interesting kind of initiatives that are happening globally all over the world. And we've got about 5 minutes left, so we're kind of starting. I'd like to do one more round of responses, but it's it's not much optimism. It's a pretty gloomy picture that you guys are painting, and you seem relatively pessimistic about the chance of us keeping warming to less than 1.5. And you mentioned 2 degrees, of course, which would be pretty catastrophic and much worse in terms of the impacts than 1.5. And I'm going to give you one last thing on the table before I get a round of responses. And this is that in that world where we have, runaway warming, and we have sea levels rising, and we have kind of scrambles over resources, aren't we less safe if we're not cooperating, if we don't have these kind of this positive globalization that Mariana was talking about, that kind of fair globalization? If the attitude that everyone takes is a kind of beggar thy neighbor, I'm going to secure my future at your expense, we're going to have climate refugees. We're going to have kind of globally more insecurity, more political insecurity. It'll be a kind of worse than if we had a more cooperative, collaborative approach as a planet. It's very similar to the argument that was made earlier in the discussion. We need each other. Well, we need each other to solve climate change, right? That's my final kind of card that I'll put on the table there for a bit of optimism. Let's go around and just wrap up with some final thoughts. So Mariana, what's your kind of takeaway from this discussion? I hope it's not all gloomy.
It's not. There is a direction to solve this, or at least make this problem smaller. But in the pessimistic side, I think that in the past 2 years, we've been getting a free sample of how society reacts when we need people to fight together for a solution. And we have people that don't believe that the solution is the best solution, people that don't believe the problem exists, people in the middle that spread fake news, sometimes intentionally, sometimes out of naivety. So I wish I could be more optimistic, because my personal conclusion is that this is a scenario that we cannot run from it. But I think that the way that society is right now, we cannot fight for this together. We cannot find a solution together and commit to a solution. I think that finding a solution is okay, but committing to a solution would be very hard.
Okay, so a pessimistic note to end on. Ivo, my final point, I guess, was that, given everything we've said, this kind of gloomy future that we're painting, strategic autonomy seems to make sense, right? Protect, what's critical. You mentioned energy, but there's other, there's digital technologies. We've had this debate about 5G. There's food, of course. There's all sorts of kind of critical things that you need to keep a society functioning. So it seems to make sense, right? Keep strategic autonomy, but then there's this countervailing thing of, if everyone focuses on strategic autonomy, does the planet as a whole become less safe? Actually, through dependencies and through cooperation, we create a more resilient species, global. Maybe it's very utopian. I don't know. What are your thoughts on this? And please, let's try. I'm really driving for a hopeful ending. So, but whatever you want to say. What's final word from you, Ivo?
Ooh, hopeful ending, really. Let's see. You're absolutely right. We need each other for if we're going to tackle this crisis, be it climate change, be it supply chain integration in the future, and so on. The problem is I really don't see who is going to be the leader of that. I really don't see, especially in Europe, who is going to be the person or the figure or the group of people who are going to lead us through this. Ursula von der Leyen? I mean, it's not serious. It's not serious. I have the feeling that what we're facing right now is the severe lack of leadership in Western democracies that can really rally the people behind them and really push in a positive direction. Now, I think this can be reversed. Maybe this is my optimism. I think it's not too late. I think it's not the end of the world yet. But I really think that we have to start focusing on what's actually important. When I take a look at very, very unpopular opinion, but with just two sentences, when I take a look at the plan of China for the next 5 years, I'm just sitting there and I'm like, oh my God, those people, they have a plan. They know what they're doing. When I take a look at the plan of the European Commission for the future, I'm sorry. I mean, it's sometimes it's laughable. Sometimes I just feel bad. Sometimes I just think it's a joke. And sometimes I just think that there is no hope, but there is hope. We should never give up. As Ricardo said, I want to get back to that. Maybe this grassroots activism, this is the way to go forward, because really in democracies, when you're very loud, you can't really be shut up. So I think that's one way to go about things. But really, we need to cooperate. The problem is, what kind of incentives can we bring to the table? And for that, I think we need strong leadership. And that's the missing piece of the puzzle. We need to incentivize going green. We need to make it clear to people why we are headed for a catastrophe if we don't get more, how can I say, independent, or if we don't change the definition of globalization that we know from school, basically. But yeah, to end on a happy note, not too late. We just need the right incentives. Who is going to bring that to the table? Really, no idea.
Okay, although maybe, as you said, this grassroots approach could lead somewhere. Ricardo, last word to you. What do you what are your thoughts as we wrap up?
So. First off, just to say then that I don't, so that it doesn't come across as I said that everything is lost or something. Every degree counts. Every degree makes a catastrophe better, and so on. So it's definitely worth anything that we can do better. It's worth doing. But to answer the question more properly, the way that I see things, this is all good news in a way, because globalization, well, it's all good news. Sorry, globalization and capitalism, or whatever we call it, have been the enablers of the exploitation and environmental destruction that we've had across the years. So essentially, if you make things smaller, either by intentional collapse or by accidental collapse, as we're having, there is less potential for exploitation. There is less potential for genocide. There is less potential for security issues. It's the way that we see security is a little bit complicated. So that's kind of my hopeful view on things, that the less powerful actors there are, that things might be better. And one thing that again to me is a question of imagination, is that it's a little bit hard to take in, I guess, and I cannot explain it very well. But with globalization, with capitalism, etc., and the concept of the nation state, the concept that I belong to a nation because I was born there, it's interesting, but I belong much more to the community that I spend my days in. And if by getting rid of globalization, capitalism, etc., by whatever inevitable collapse, if we already foster a culture that is smaller, that democracy is smaller and less abstract, where trade is more personal and less abstract, then things have the potential to change a little bit. Because I will I will have no problem in explaining my neighbors if I don't know them. But if I trade with them because I know the needs of my community and I know the needs of their community, and we have networks of communities that understand each other that way, then it has a chance of being a little bit more human and a little bit more safe. Will it be perfect? I don't know. Will it be messy? For sure. But yeah, that's still sounds better than me being able to exploit pretty much everyone in the world every time I go to the supermarket. So
it is. No, I mean, it's a big idea to drop in the last kind of 30 seconds of the discussion. I have to say, Mariana, I'll give up my last word and I'll give it to Mariana. What did you want to say?
No, I was just thinking of some bright side or some optimistic words to that. And you mentioned the 90s, and I think that we can take the 90s as an example of a good example that shows that if nations are in peace, like we can have times of peace. Of course, we had conflicts in the 90s. We had genocides in the 90s. I know that, but in general, many countries were not affected by that and they thrived. Countries that were affected by that, they were devastated. But we can see that the ones that benefit from peace, they benefit from development and control of inflation, and even better logistics and distribution of goods among partners. So if I can offer some optimistic words, I think that we should take the example of periods of our recent history that we afforded to have peace and invest in peace, because we see things working when we're living times of peace.
Okay, that is an optimistic note. We should remember that we have had times of peace and see if we can learn from them. I like it. Okay, we rescued it. We got some optimism to close this down. I mean, we could have gone on for longer, guys. We could have. There's so many things what directions we could have taken this. I hope it's got your kind of juices flowing in terms of asking some questions. I'd like you to stay with me just for 10 minutes, just to have a kind of recording session for the questions. Those of you watching at home, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. And if you did, please go to debatingeurope.eu. You can also add your own kind of thoughts and questions. You can send them in to us and we'll take them to policymakers and experts to respond. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.